So, today we're traveling in the historical city of Venice and traveling in its wondrous narrow streets here. Could tell you a few interesting things actually about these streets. So, differently than what you see nowadays in these streets, it was quite different actually previously. Until the 19th century, this city actually did have a lot more canal streets than it does have today. What happened? Till the 19th century, most people traveled here by boats here, and with the introduction of train lines here, you obviously had more people traveling here without boats. So the city eventually had to decide to introduce more walkable streets inside the town here. So what they did, they paved a lot of the roads, and there are not canals anymore here. So while walking these streets, you can find some interesting hints here. There are basically streets which are called either Calais or Salizada or Rugo or Ramos. So Salizada, for example, is the more interesting street here because Salizada were like main streets which eventually were one of the first actually roads which became paved here. So when you're walking on any kind of street which begins from Salizada, you can imagine that previously people were traveling by boats on these streets here. Rugo translates literally to wrinkle, and it basically means a very long street. Ramos is probably a street where in other circumstances, in a more maybe not safe city, you wouldn't want to go here because it literally means a blind street here where you're just not gonna find anything at the end of it here, and they're practically streets which lead you to connection streets leading to someone's house, for example, here. So yeah, probably will find a lot of like videos of our travel blogs or something talking about stuff like the enjoyment of getting lost in this city here. And yeah, I can actually truly tell you that even if you have a GPS here, it's gonna be a bit difficult to use your GPS here because GPS within these narrow streets is very spotty, I would say. And yeah, having probably a physical map sometimes here is gonna be quite useful, but this is probably one of the more enjoyable parts here because it's actually quite pleasurable to get lost in this place here. Right now we're near one of the most iconic places of Venice, so St. Mark's Square, and you can see also the Basilica of St. Mark here. Quite iconic place, a lot of people. It also bears a bit of history behind the heraldry of the city itself here. This place is special because of a few things here. Back in the day of the Venetian Republic, two merchants from Venice were able actually to travel to Egypt and steal the body of Saint Mark. The story is quite fascinating because they were able to sneak past. Oh yeah, sorry, pigeon just shoot it there. Now we're near one of the most historical bridges here, the Rialto Bridge in Venice, which connects the older part of the city to the San Marco part of the city here. This bridge, although a very tourist attraction and photo place for many here, it has a bit of more history than probably usually people would think. Interesting thing about it is here that Rialto was one of the first places historically and technically which Venice was settled in the 10th century, or 9th century, my apologies for being inaccurate here. And interesting fact is that for probably the first few hundred years the actual name of the city was not Venice, but the actual name of the city was Rialto here, and only later changed to being Venice. It's also a place of some historical events here. So, for example, the Venetian Republic at some point was the San Marco Republic here, and it was one of the last places, well, places where there was the last defensive battle with the Jacobins, essentially, here in defense of the San Marco Republic, which later on, well, dispersed into existence, unfortunately.
Al locale, quello sempre
Dopo sono solo i show, ik laat het voor. Misschien hebben ze wel een keer in gewoon samen te filmen. Wat nou een keer in in fare? Ma se andare a darmi alla canale.
La vendo meglio chi di te.
Did you do that? No, I've never done Da Aldo, quindi ci vediamo in piazza. Ci vediamo in piazza. L'ho trovato.
Tanto
Qua per pirmą. Čia.
We're traveling through a neighborhood of Cannaregio here in Venice. One of the more recommended neighborhoods, I would suggest, in Venice itself. If you're visiting this whole amazing city, I would recommend to visit this neighborhood first of all here, because it's maybe a more less popular neighborhood of Venice, but maybe one which does represent Venice as a city in a more unique fashion here. Here you'll find a lot less English-speaking restaurants, bars, a lot less English menus here, but I can definitely assure you that on the other hand you'll see a lot more true Venice here than if you're walking around San Marco or any of the more other default places here. Right now we're gonna be traveling to the Jewish ghetto, having a look right there. Interesting facts actually here. I'm gonna show a few things here. If you have a look at one of these buildings here, most of these buildings back in the day were buildings of Venice merchants here, and we have a few, let's say, unique things to have in mind here. The typical house of a Venetian merchant usually was consisted of a house, his house, and a warehouse here. So for example, when you have the first floor here, back in the day this usually would be the warehouse of the merchant's house itself here, where you can imagine, like right now with these boats right here, that ships would arrive near the house here, unloading various goods inside of the warehouse here. The last floor, usually you would think that the merchant itself would be living there, but actually not really.
Penthouse.
It's not really like a penthouse vibe like you would see nowadays here, but the last floor usually would have lower ceilings than, let's say, the second floor or third floor, and that's where actually the servants lived, in the last floor here. And the second or third floor, let's say, here, even you can even see it right here actually here, from the height of the windows, let's say here, that they have a lot higher actually ceilings here, so that's where the merchant itself would be living here. So let's continue. Now we're going to be going to the Jewish ghetto. It's special because the Jewish ghetto here in Venice was actually one of the first ghettos in Europe in general here. It consisted mostly of 3 different Jewish cultures, let's say here. You had the Spanish Jews, which arrived to live in the ghetto. the German ones and the Italian ones here. The Jewish ghetto itself is a bit special here because the buildings here usually in Venice, they're like 2 floors, 3 floors, maybe 4. The Jewish ghetto has one of the highest buildings in the whole city itself. Right now here, so it's like seven floors actually here. I'm gonna show you this. 7 floors. One of the more higher old buildings here. A few reasons why this happened actually here. So the Jewish ghetto, when we get inside of it here, you'll see that it's not really actually a big place, but the population which was living inside of the ghetto was quite large here. So you should have something like 4,000 people living there. So it was quite packed. So the only option for you to pack as much people here as possible would be, of course, to go up. That's why it had quite high buildings here. Here we are, nice ghetto square. Interesting thing about the Jewish ghetto itself was that, as I mentioned, there was like Jewish communities from Spain, from Italy and Germany here. Although they did have a feel of community together here, but at the same time they wanted to separate well, their uniqueness between each other here. So what they did essentially here, each of those communities built its own synagogue here. The synagogues are really difficult to see here. You need a bit of an eye actually to see them here. They're actually free for each of them. So, for example, this building, as you can see, it doesn't look like a synagogue here, but it was built inside of a building essentially. It is a synagogue. You can actually understand the synagogue because of those 5 windows, you could say, here, which represent the 5 books of Torah. So that's one of them. Have a lot of scaffolding here, but if you look more closely, like here, have a dome. So that's the second synagogue. And then there's the Spanish synagogue, which goes more towards that way here. Although ghettos never were quite a fun place to live in here, but the Jewish ghetto actually did have its strict rules, but it did flourish at some point here. Usually you had people working here such as doctors, which is, well, maybe not quite unusual to the ever populace here, but quite the good, let's say, profession to be in. Then you had professions which Christian people maybe didn't really want or could work, so stuff like pawn makers or moneylenders here, because in Christianity, at least in the early stages of the Middle Ages here, being a pawn shop essentially here, a moneylender, counted as working a filthy job essentially by Christian means here. So that was one of the reasons why the Jewish community worked those kind of jobs here. Well, they were quite restricted, let's say, in what they could do here, but they still did flourish here. The city of Venice did gain a lot of money actually from just having this kind of community and them flourishing here. So you could say that it was kind of like ATM probably for the Republic itself. But yeah, very nice place. I do recommend to visit this place. Really quite good food here also, by the way. Murano. Probably a 30-minute drive by the water bus from the center of Venice. This island is known for its glass making, glass blowing traditions here. Really worth visiting if you're here in Venice. You'll be able to see a lot of the foundries, factories. Right now we're visiting the glass museum here in Murano, where you can see and experience various glass craftsmanship examples here. Anything from vases, earrings, beads, practically anything from glass which you can imagine. Interesting thing which I didn't know, actually found out here, but Murano is quite famous because of this glass craftsmanship, not just because essentially here. The Venetians here were one of the first people in Europe here in the Renaissance era, to be more exact in the 14th century here, who brought in glass making into Europe here. They were highly inspired actually by the Middle Eastern glass makers here, craftsmen here. So to be more exact, they brought the whole craftsmanship from Syria. They were, at the beginning, they crafted various things essentially here from colored glass here, but were also quite well known as being one of the first craftsmen essentially here to be able to produce clear glass. And not long after, in the 15th century here, Venice became as one of the main centers of glass making here in the whole of Renaissance Europe here. And in result of that, most of the glass making trade was taken over from the Middle East. And now we're on the second island out of the three that we're planning to visit here. So this is now Burano. Previously we were on the Murano, which is well known for its glass craftsmanship here. So now we're on the island which is really well known for its lace craftsmanship here. I'm actually quite fascinated and interested in glass making here and the stuff that you can make from them here, but to be totally honest, I'm not really interested in lace craftsmanship here, although I do understand that this should be quite a respectable thing to do. Anyways, apart from lace craftsmanship here, this island town is more known, let's say, also by its colorful, vibrant buildings here, as you can see. Very vibrant colors, very bright colors here. Don't know, at least the locals say that these buildings were made in such a bright way, essentially, here back also in the day here, and one of the reasons being that the fishermen, when they were traveling out to catch fish, essentially here, and there was a situation that you had a lot of fog in the area here, the colors did help them out in finding the way back home. I don't imagine why they could have not simply just made a lighthouse, which is the more common way to help fishermen find the way back. But anyways, let's try to find out, is there something interesting in this town, something more than just lace making here. But yeah, if you want to get some gifts for your grandmother, so this is probably gonna be the best place for some gifts for your grandmother.
Weet als ik gebouwd heb, dan was het gewoon stel dan ik dan meteen. Toen was dat nog mooi. Ja, bisogna. Va bene, dai. Vado,
Buono.
Andate dentro in chiesa, Fatti indietro! Ci sei più? Vieni! Come ti chiami? Dormo sempre anche se come ti chiami? Sogno senza live.
Poi torniamo a lezione.
And that's it.